All right. For this segment of the show, I have a special interview with Sheldon Johnston of the Libertarian Party. Hey, Sheldon, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And could you tell everybody a little bit about where you are, what you do, what your involvement with the Libertarian Party is?
Well, I was a candidate in the last federal by-election in October for the riding of Medicine Hat, Cardston, Warner. I'm living right now in Medicine Hat, and I was a representative for the Libertarian Party. I work as a chaplain, and I have worked previously, served in the military, and worked in a number of different jobs, but most of my career has been spent working in professional ministry.
Right on. And you said you were involved in that last election. I take it that means that you were not the winning candidate for Medicine Hat.
No, I garnered 1% of the vote, but I wasn't very far behind the NDP candidate, so that was encouraging.
That's definitely encouraging. I can't imagine that Medicine Hat is a bastion of NDP.
Well, we have an NDP candidate provincially, which was the first time in our riding's history. But I think right now they're at a low point provincially. The party is not very welcome and well received here right now.
That's fair. Can you tell everybody a little bit about the Libertarian Party and I mean how you got involved in that, what you do, or what you were sort of your platform as a candidate was?
Well, I've been quite interested in libertarian ideas for quite some time. I haven't been involved in federal politics. Politically, I have worked for various parties. Actually, I think for all of the mainline parties at one point or other. Previously, I was the deputy leader of the Saskatchewan Green Party in 2012. But one thing that I tried to do when I was working with the Green Party is introduce them to the idea that the free market solutions are the best solutions for overcoming our environmental challenges. But I'm very concerned about our federal and provincial deficits. I think Canada is beginning to get in some very difficult straits as far as our debt. And I think that the nanny state is simply weighing upon us too heavily. And rather than seeing important issues go by the wayside, I felt it was important for someone to represent a liberty perspective. I know that the conservative candidate that was nominated, the path that he found to the nomination was by signing up as many Liberal Party supporters as possible. And we're seeing more and more of this where people are, I think, attempting to short-circuit our democratic process by engaging in activities that, I guess you could say the mainstream party faithful would not be comfortable with. And I think it really undermines our democracy. And so I saw an opportunity to run as a candidate, and I believe actually I probably would have polled upwards of about 10% had Justin Trudeau not decided to campaign in the riding. When he showed up, it really polarized the voters to either the Liberal candidate or the Conservative candidate. And I think that a lot of potential votes that I would have received were at that point, lost one way or the other.
That's fair. And I would imagine that would make it a little bit hard, especially with Prime Minister Selfie being there. That would certainly draw attention away from the Libertarian Party. Can you tell me a little bit about the party platform, sort of what it is the Libertarian Party is campaigning on?
Well, the main policy that we were campaigning on was taxation. So the signs that I put up across the riding were regarding the 15% flat tax. And so we would reduce individual taxes to 15%, which would mean that someone, for example, a family of four would have to earn over $46,000 before they'd have to pay tax. For corporate taxes, a small business would not pay any taxes, and a medium or large-sized business would have to pay a reduced rate from what they're paying right now. So that was the main policy that we were campaigning on. Personally, I was quite concerned about Bill C-16, which is the transgender rights bill that is going through the House of Commons right now. I believe it restricts freedom of speech, and I am a big supporter of Jordan Peterson and his ideas. But also, I think another platform that is important especially for, I think some of your listeners, is the policy towards gun ownership. I'm a big advocate for reducing the restrictions on gun ownership, and I think that's especially in this point in Canadian history, it's important for us to be able to own our own firearms, to be able to protect ourselves, and to, I guess, if you will, to keep the government in check.
So you're talking about both a right to self-protection and a right, when you say to keep the government in check, you're talking about basically Second Amendment style gun ownership.
Exactly. I believe that we should have the same policies right now that would be in effect in the U.S.
Well, I'm totally on board with that. I don't think that we have enough good people with guns here, but that's my opinion.
Yeah. So, lifting some of the restrictions on restricted weapons and not requiring, some of the red tape that individuals have to go through to become a gun owner, I think would be quite helpful. I know that in larger cities, there are some concerns regarding gun ownership. But there are other means of protecting the public other than bringing in a whole bunch of restrictive laws.
Absolutely, I I really can't agree stronger with that. I mean, really, the number of laws and the absurdity of our current government's what's gotten us into the predicament that we're in now. If we can repeal more of that and let people be adults, that's, I think, a better choice than listening to the government tell me what to do. So I don't need somebody else to tell me what's best for me. I sort of have already figured that out.
Right. I know that for some people, like I know within our own party, there isn't a large number of social conservatives. And I think, one thing that I've heard from some of my friends and so forth is, they really wonder whether or not a social conservative can exist and function in the Libertarian Party. But liberty is something I think that everyone can enjoy. As long as, you have your freedom, I have mine. What you do on your side of the fence is totally up to you. And I don't believe that, laws restricting our freedoms is a way that we can really coexist as a society, as a country. And I think that, everyone should be free to make their own choices.
No, that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of stuff about the Libertarian Party and the ideology driving the Libertarian Party that appeals to me, particularly things like the non-aggression principle. I just want to be left alone to do my own thing until I'm hurting somebody else.
Exactly. I mean, there are some policies that are a little bit controversial. There is a difference of opinion. I think that abortion or hot topics, LGBT rights, for example, or marijuana and drug laws are some of the hot topics that people ask about the most. But generally speaking, I think everyone should have the freedom to make their own choices. I don't believe that the government should act as a parent in defining what our own personal proclivities are. But I think that freedom is important for everyone.
Yeah, we've talked about the marijuana issue a number of times on the podcast. The Libertarian Party perspective on marijuana is, I suppose, as long as you're not making anybody else do it, it's okay to grow some plants and then smoke them.
Well, yeah, it's no person should be arrested for possession of a plant. Myself, my wife and I have 3 children with autism, and I've been trying to get a doctor's note for probably about 3 or 4 years now that would allow us to legally, give our child CBD or some of the benefits of medicinal marijuana. But we can't even find a doctor that's willing to sign a note. And so I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding. One of the doctors told me that he didn't want to turn my son into a pothead, But if you know anything about, someone who's severely disabled, that's not even a possibility. So it's a bit of a challenge to educate people.
Yeah, I suppose that's true of most issues, though.
Yeah.
I mean, it's whether it's marijuana or whether it's access to firearms, whether it's setting a flat tax, those are all like massive topics. And to just tell somebody, well, we should be able to do it, most people are going to need a lot more convincing than that.
Yeah, exactly.
We do actually have feedback because this is live on the YouTube. And I guess it looks like an email actually went out to a bunch of listeners. So we actually have people already adding comments, if you don't mind taking a couple.
Okay.
We've got libertarianism is attractive to social conservatives because it's a system that allows the market to punish objectively bad behavior. I think that's a pretty fair assessment. If you don't behave in a way that people want to have you behave, they don't buy your products, and you can't employ people. That seems pretty reasonable.
Mm-hmm. Well, not only that, but on the other end as well. I mean, if you want to make decisions, for example, in becoming a drug addict, if you will, there isn't a reliance, a dependency on a social safety net to be able to rescue you in case you do decide to become an addict. You'll pay the price for that, and I think it's important for individuals to be self-sufficient, to make their own choices. And if they want to make the wrong choices, then they'll have to pay the consequences. But the idea that somehow the government should bail us out of every problem, we can't continue to live that way. I think it's been a drain on our resources. Like in Alberta here, we've had tremendous resource revenues that have been completely squandered. And Norway, as an example, has managed to save nearly $1 trillion now. And Alberta is sitting in a deficit because we've blown that money. And I think that even if we're considering the next generation, we can't continue to live this way.
I think that's fair. So would it be safe to assume that if we were to let I don't know if I should say you or the Libertarian Party into power, that we could safely remove those safely remove those social safety nets? So, like, for example, I ride a motorcycle. If I choose to ride a motorcycle without a helmet, I'd be on the hook for my own medical care. Should I crash and plaster myself all over the side of the highway?
Well, I mean, I don't think that anyone who's going to any party that's looking to govern would make changes overnight that would put our whole economy or put our society in a tailspin. And so when we talk about making potential changes, I think those changes have to be incremental.
Oh, absolutely. So, I'm not saying that we could push the big red button overnight, because that would cause a lot of people to be in a very serious situation very quickly. But ideal state, I mean. Yes.
I mean, ideally, like, for example, talking about medical care, I think that we have to move to a different medical model. I think having privatized care, or at least a system where there's private and public care, I think would be helpful. And ultimately, I think that it would save taxpayers, it would save our medical system a tremendous amount of money if there was a fee that someone had to use. So, for example, every time you go to see a doctor, you should be paying a fee. But, I've getting back to your question, I mean, I've been a motorcycle enthusiast myself, and I think that people should have the freedom to make their own choices. And quite frankly, I mean, I would always wear a helmet and wear safety equipment. I've been involved in one serious accident where my helmet saved me. But if a person decides they don't want to wear that, I don't think that the government or the police should be using force to determine how a person operates their own vehicle.
That makes sense. I've got more YouTube questions. I think this is going back to marijuana. Some feller, when a government doesn't allow you to put something in your body, doesn't that include government ownership? Doesn't that indicate government ownership of your body? And I would think that that's not a stretch to make that assumption, like make that link.
Well, yeah, when they determine what you can and can't put into your body, I think the government is claiming some ownership over the population. I think an excellent example of that would be this new drug called kratom that is essentially a pain reliever, but the FDA in the U.S. stepped in and prevented people from owning a natural substance that I think people should have the choice to use. It has a lot of potential benefits and less drawbacks than OxyContin or some of the other addictive drugs. So ultimately, I think people have to make up their own choices should be making their own choices about substances. We're paying a huge price in confining people and locking them up simply for possessing something that, for example, a century ago would not be considered against the law.
All right. And in the same vein, there's also a question from the International Liberty or Death podcast. I'm not sure if this is coming from Tyler or Matt over at the International Liberty or Death podcast. Question. If the Libertarian Party is in favor of personal choice regarding substance consumption, is it also in favor of repealing or modifying social health care system that would have to bear the costs of bad health choices, i.e. the existing system gives the state an incentive to police personal behavior because the state picks up the healthcare tab? Giving people their own freedom back must also mean they're on their own to pay their own bills. And, it's from Tyler. I think we've sort of just finished touching on that a moment ago, and I think the generality is yes, but it's not a change that can be made overnight. Is that fair?
Yes. I think one thing that I think libertarians rely upon is also that if we lessen the tax burden, it allows a lot more disposable income for people to be able to use, for example, in a charitable way. And so rather than having the government, force you to fork over 40% of your income and then, basically using it for charitable means by force, it allows individuals to make up their own mind. And so, for example, in our community, we have, in this riding, some very robust mental health facilities and substance abuse facilities. And these would continue to operate. But if they were, for example, to operate under, 50% of, donations, charitable donations, these organizations would still continue to function. And I think generally speaking, we're a very wealthy society. We don't want to see people who are addicts, on the street. And we are generous in caring for them. And so I don't expect, if we were to withdraw, especially, in a community like this, that we would see people that would be suffering as a result of that.
That makes sense. I'd prefer that we went to that model where I could sort of dictate how my money best helps other people.
Exactly.
Rather than relying on the government to decide who gets how much of my earnings.
Exactly. And we send, one of the other issues that I spoke about in the campaign is that we send a massive amount of money overseas in aid. Now, there are some things that I think are very positive and beneficial that we do internationally. Other things I completely disagree with. And I think it should be up to each individual to decide how their money, potentially would be spent. I don't want my money to be spent on, foreign elections, for example. I don't think that we should be trying to export, our ideas, to other countries and say that, if you want our money, then you have to agree to certain principles. Like right now, the Prime Minister is in Africa and he's distributing aid, but he's telling, Africans that they have to subscribe to, our ideals regarding LGBT policies, which I think is stupid. I think that these countries have to be able to make up their own mind about what type of laws that they want. And it's incredibly presumptuous to think that we know better than they do about how they should live.
Wow. We've talked about that a couple of times, that we have a lot of people in this country, and not just in Canada, but in the Western first world countries in general, that want to mother everyone else. And I think this is an example of that. Is what the Prime Minister recently appointed a new ministerial position expressly for LGBTQ2 stuff. Like, we have a whole government position to look after that now, and now we're trying to export it to other countries that are receiving aid money.
It-
I
it-
really don't think that the government has any business dictating how anybody identifies themselves or who they decide to have intercourse with, never mind telling other countries how their populace should behave.
just the flip side of this, I want to talk about that as well. So the previous government, the conservative government, had a religious liberties office that they were defining, for example, to other countries, mainly Muslim countries, how they should allow their citizens to live and how they should function. So we were dictating to other countries what is moral and what is immoral. Now, quite frankly, ultimately, I don't want to see, for example, LGBT people thrown off a building, in ISIS territory and so forth. But it's incredibly presumptuous for our government to say that, this is a set of ethical values by which you must live, because it presumes that we're not making any mistakes. And I think that we're making some tremendous social mistakes. And so, ultimately, I think that the liberals are making some mistakes right now, but the conservatives, in many respects, are just as bad.
No, absolutely. And I personally don't agree with any political party. I really want this to be as much of a direct democracy as it could be. I should be able to get to choose absolutely everything that I'm involved in. And if I choose not to be involved, I should get left alone until I'm hurting anyone. But that's not... it's like flipping the switch on healthcare. There'd be a lot of really unhappy people. Probably also be a lot of really dead people in the short term because they couldn't function on their own.
Right. Well, we become so dependent on the government to take care of us that, if something were to happen, there would be a lot of people in our society that would be in big trouble.
No, absolutely. I mean, and that's not just like a Canadian or social welfare thing. Basically, every Western first world type country, no one is adequately prepared. Like, I forget what the stat is, but it's something like, and I'm afraid it's an American stat, it's something like 60% plus of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. They just don't have anything ahead.
Yeah.
And I would imagine there's a similar statistic in Canada. How would those people be able to survive if the government wasn't there to provide them? If they're living paycheck to paycheck, they're going to have to go on welfare if they lose their job. They're going to have to go to an aid program if they lose their home because of a natural disaster. They simply don't have the means to support themselves.
Exactly. So, I don't think that we're going to solve all the problems tonight. And I know as a party we have some challenges. But and I'm hopeful that, for example, with the Conservative Party, I know that Maxime Bernier is a Libertarian candidate that is advancing some of these ideas, and I'm hoping that he gains some traction. One of the other issues that I was quite vocal about was supply management. We have basically a Soviet-style administration for our agriculture policies. Like
the wheat board, the dairy board.
Well, yeah, the dairy board, and for chickens, for eggs as well. We have marketing boards that increase the cost of food. I think that without the dairy board, we would probably save, I think it's about $1.50 or a little over $1 a liter. And over the course of the year, a family of four shells out over $500, close to $600 in additional money simply because of the dairy board. And there's no need for this.
No, absolutely. We'll start wrapping it up here. I do have a question because the main topic for this episode is going to be the conservative leadership race. Is Bernier your pick for CPC leadership if you got to choose?
Well, before the election in the U.S., I would have said yes. But after the election, I'm not so sure. I think that, I regard Trump as being somewhat of a strong man. And I think that with his threat to, for example, open up NAFTA and potentially look into our NATO and our defense relationships, I think that it's crazy that we have, what Kevin O'Leary describes as a situation where, Donald Trump is like Godzilla and Justin Trudeau is like Bambi. We can't afford to have a leader that's not strong in standing up to, potentially what the U.S. is going to throw at us. and I'm not sure exactly who fills that role. Kelly Leach has been saying some very positive things, and I think that she wants to represent a stronger role. She describes herself as being like a Margaret Thatcher type of character. I'm not so sure, but ultimately, I have been hearing Kevin O'Leary talking about the potential for running. I know that he's not bilingual, which is a big drawback. But ultimately, I myself, I think that we have to do what's right for Canada. And, quite frankly, if Quebec is a little bit unhappy with an Anglophone being elected, I think that they need to suck it up. I think that probably Kevin O'Leary would be the best choice right now for the party.
Right on. I want to thank Sheldon for coming on the show tonight for a special interview. And we'll tune you back into your regular programming.